Good morning, Grace family. Happy to be here with you on a Tuesday looking at Psalms 16. Quite amount of time studying this morning. Just there's so much in this psalm, and honestly, I can't do it all today. I'm going to. We're going to get through it all. We're going to just read through it, and we're going to miss a ton. But at the very least, I can give you a snapshot. Um, really enjoyed. I did a reading on a book I would highly recommend. I want to just give it a shout out. Messiah in the Old Testament by Walter C. Kaiser Jr. Really great book. I would highly recommend utilizing this, especially as we're looking at messianic psalms occasionally. He has a fairly decent section in his book, and it's really easy to understand. He does a great job breaking it down. In addition to some other commentaries I could recommend, but at the very least, that one's a pretty easy resource to pick up, and did a really great job explaining the text. So let's take a look at Psalm 16 together, starting in verse 1. A mitkam of David. Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. As for the saints in the land, they are excellent ones, in whom is all of my delight. The sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply. Their drink offerings of blood I shall not pour out, or take their names upon my lips. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup, and you hold my lot. The lines have indeed fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. The night also my heart instructs me. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the paths of life, and in your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are the pleasures forevermore. Psalm 16. This psalm may be really well known by many of you. Obviously, the entitlement on my ESV translation is, you will not abandon my soul. This is quoted in the New Testament, and we will get to that section shortly. First off, I just want to remind you of the words that sometimes that get transliterated that we just don't know. So we see right here in the beginning, it says a mitam of David. Brown, Diver, and Driggs specifically gives us a technical term, again, meaning. Notice right here, meaning unknown. So there are some things that we just don't know, and I've commented this to you before. And for people to get all bent out of shape over certain things, it's kind of hard to. We don't know. Now it comes from the little bit of the root word of gold, and so you'll notice that word is directly underneath of it. The word gold is found in an element within it, so there's been some speculation about how it might specifically mean, but we don't know. Verse 1. Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. This has been a consistent theme throughout the Psalms, and it's something you're going to continue to see, especially in David's Psalms, is this cry out to God that God would preserve him, and that he would be able to take refuge in God. Verse 2, I say to the Lord, you are my Lord, and I have no good apart from you. We could spend the entire time talking about verse 2. Um, David recognizes that all good gifts come from God, that everything that is good that he has encountered in his life, everything that is any experience of pleasure, joy, peace, all of those things, it's not apart from the Lord. The Lord has given those things. He is the sustainer and the provider of those good things. And so we could talk a lot about the good that's in your life and my life and the things that we've experienced that are good, and we could recognize and praise God for the fact that all those things that exist, we would not have apart from the Lord. Uh, Verse 3, as for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. David makes a comment here that those who are the holy ones, those are who are the ones who are loved by God, who are in turn, they are the holy ones in Israel. They do what God has commanded. They are the excellent ones. They are the ones in whom he takes delight. Now, some people have argued there's all sorts of different, in fact, Kaiser specifically gives 4 particular time periods that this could exist in David's life. But either way, at this point, David is saying, look, those who are your people, those who are following after you, they're the ones in whom I take all of my delight. And I make note of this specifically because how much more should this be true in the church? How much more should this be true in the New Testament era when we have been all bought by the precious blood of Christ, that we would take delight and that we would enjoy the company and being around those who are blood-bought believers. If you don't, it's a problem and there's an issue there. And maybe that's an issue in the community as a whole, or maybe that's an issue in your own heart. And so either way, we should find delight in those whose delight is the Lord, because that should be our delight as well. Verse 4, the sorrows of those who run after another god shall multiply. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out, or take their names upon my lips. Now, it's interesting because we've been going through the book of Hosea on Wednesday nights, and it's very interesting because Hosea is just all about Israel and the condemnation of Israel going after other and pursuing other gods. And so I think, David here is saying, the sorrows of them who run after God, it's going to get worse. If they run after another god, it's going to get worse. And he says, their drink offerings of blood that they're pouring out for these other gods, I'm not going to pour out. And I'm not even going to take the names of those gods on my lips. That's how far away he wants to be removed from what's going on in those areas. And so to a certain extent, this may be a time period where David's not in control, not doing, leading the country. It might be during the time of Saul. And so because of this, he sees the false worship that's happening, and he says, I'm not even going to take the name of these gods on my lips. That's that level of separation. Verse 5, the Lord is my chosen portion and my cup, and you hold my lot. David has this cry consistently throughout all of his writings. In Psalm 142:5, he says this, he says, I cry to you, O Lord, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. This is the idea that ultimately David sees that God is his portion. God is his reward. The Lord is his portion. The Lord is his reward. And so he says that the Lord holds his lot, and the things that David is going to receive, which is all good, he's already said, the Lord holds it. Verse 6, he says, the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. The lines is kind of a weird thing for us, but it's in terms of measuring out the land. The lines are like a land surveying, the allotted lands amongst David, the lands that David has, the way that the lines have been laid out, that God has done, the lot that God has given David. He has been given pleasant places. Indeed, he has a beautiful inheritance. And so David looks to see what God is going to give him, his chosen portion, his cup, his lot, and he sees that it is going to be a pleasant lot. It is going to be a beautiful inheritance. It is not something that maybe he yet possesses, but something that he yet will possess. Verse 7 says, I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. We see that David is pursuing after the counsel of the Lord. That's where he's trying to get his counsel. We do so by studying the scriptures. So did David, by studying the scriptures and knowing what the Lord has said. And it says, at the night my heart instructs me. Now, technically in Hebrew, the heart here, it actually means kidneys. However, if we direct translated, my kidneys instruct me, I don't think any of us would really be like, what? We understand this to mean that in our innermost feelings and thoughts, which we oftentimes use the word heart for, that our heart's instructing us. Now, it's not a heart that's instructing us from our desires. The heart would be instructing David from the Lord and the counsel that the Lord has given, that he has hidden in his heart that he might not sin against him. Right? Thinking about that in terms of the counsel that he's being received. Verse 8 says, I have set the Lord always before me. Again, this is why his heart can instruct him. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. He invokes this very same idea elsewhere in Psalm 109:31, where he says, with my mouth I will give great thanks to the Lord. I will praise him in the midst of the throng, for he stands at the right hand of the needy one to save him from those who condemn his soul to death. He says, ultimately, the Lord is at my right hand, so I will not be shaken. Because the Lord is at his right hand, it's like a security that comes from a protective weapon on the field of battle. When the Lord is close fighting by your side, there is nothing to be shaken of. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be worried about. Furthermore, verse 9, this is where we start getting into some very interesting language stuff. We'll talk about this a little bit here. David is then glad and he rejoices in his whole being. In the Hebrew word here, he says, my heart is glad, my whole being rejoices. The word whole being here really can be translated as glory or splendor. And so what's interesting is that he's saying my glory, my splendor, that which makes me what I am. And I'll just show you the word there so you can see it. Abundance, honor, glory. That's what the word riches, honor, splendor, glory, all of those things. He says that my whole being, my honor, my splendor, my glory, those things rejoice. Well, why would they rejoice? That feels kind of odd. What would it mean that David's glory would rejoice? Well, because ultimately his glory and gladness is found in the Lord. It's not found in himself. It's not found in what he's done. Instead, it's solely upon what the Lord has promised him. Excuse me. We always hold those sneezes if I can. Anyways, so he says, my whole being rejoices, my flesh dwells secure. Well, why does it dwell secure? It's because ultimately he knows that his security is not found in himself. It's not found in his own actions. It's found in the Lord. The fact that the Lord is at his right hand, that he will not be shaken. His flesh dwells secure. David comments specifically that he knows who upholds him. It's the Lord. Now, in the middle of verse 9, Kaiser and other scholars have pointed out that David transitions to the imperfect tense in Hebrew. What has been a fairly consistent tense gets shifted over, maybe a present tense, to an imperfect tense, which imperfect tense kind of gives the idea of there is no time associated with it, or it's a time that's not yet, but it's a time that is, it's imperfect. And so the Hebrew consonants in this section also go from the idea of David to where we start seeing some plural consonants, but the vowels are, which is very interesting, singular. And so the consonants would give you the reading of your holy ones, but the vowel points are very clear that you're supposed to translate it your holy one. Now, the Masoretic text, for those of you who don't know, a Masoretic text is the primary Hebrew text. It's the text of tradition. It's considered the authoritative Hebrew and Aramaic text of the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible. Their books are broken up a little bit differently than ours are. For instance, Psalms is 5 books, and the prophets are 1. And anyways, there's 24 books in the Hebrew Tanakh. And the Masoretic text defines the Jewish canon and its precise letter text, with the vocalizations and accentations known as the Masorah. And so the Masorah, the Masoretic text, gives us a very clear reading that this is supposed to be singular. It requires that it's read in the singular. Now, what's so interesting about that is that specifically, both Peter and Paul argue in Acts, both in Acts chapter 2, verse 27, you will not abandon my soul to Hades or let your Holy One see corruption. Peter argues, brothers, I say to you with confidence, that David died and was buried. He spoke of one of his descendants, that he would not be abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. This Jesus God raised up. Paul making the same exact argument, therefore he says in another psalm, you will not let your Holy One see corruption. David served the purpose of his own generation, fell asleep, was laid with his fathers, and saw corruption. But he whom God raised up did not see corruption. Let you know, therefore, that through this man forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you, that being Jesus. So both Peter and Paul get the idea that this is supposed to be read not as your holy ones, which would give an indication that God is going to raise up all men, which is exactly kind of the idea. But in verse 10, there's this one specific person that David is in reference to. And so another thing that's important too is the Holy One here. It's more than just someone who's pious. The idea here is that someone who is hesed, who is favored of God. This could fairly be translated, let your favorite one see corruption. The idea here is the one whom receives God's favor. Now, David asserts that this particular Holy One that's going to see corruption will not see corruption, and that this particular one will not be abandoned to Sheol. Now, David recognizes that he's going to have to die. I mean, I think that's a pretty consistent understanding. David knew that through his life, and even at the end of his life, he even knew that my time is coming soon. But he remembered the promise of the Lord that his kingdom would be an everlasting kingdom, and then that one would be one sitting on the throne who would last forever. And so David, I think, looking out for this future individual, he sees the Messiah in this, and this is who he's in reference to. Notice also in verse 11 that David asserts that by this bringing his soul from Sheol and keeping this one from corruption, that David sees that the path of life will be known. Because he says, you will not abandon my soul to Sheol. You will not let your Holy One see corruption. Something different, imperfect tense, someone else. You make known to me the path of life. Well, why wouldn't he put that towards the beginning or before this statement? Because it's by this process that the path of life becomes known. And look at this, in your presence there is fullness of joy. Now, I think the individual who's crafting the Psalms very intentional about, or I should say organizing the Psalms, very intentional about where he put this, because we had just dealt with yesterday, if you remember, who's going to dwell with the Lord? Who's going to be able to be in his presence? Well, now we have specifically here David saying that in your presence there's the fullness of joy. There's this element to which David's saying that he's going to be able to be in the presence of the Lord, but more than that, at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. There is this element of which something that happens in verse 9 and 10 gives us an indication that there is an eternality in David's mind, and where he's going to be in the presence of the Lord, and that there's an element to which he's going to be at his right hand. And it's going to be forevermore. It's something that doesn't end. And so all of that is there, a picture of the gospel of when Christ comes and he dies and he pays the penalty on our behalf, that he's buried in the ground, but he's not abandoned to Sheol, the place of the dead, and instead of seeing corruption, he sees no corruption. Instead, he's raised to newness of life because death could not hold. And because of that specifically, there are going to be this path of life, pleasures of joy forevermore with the Lord. And that is the gospel being portrayed in Psalm chapter 16. Messianic Psalm. This is one of the few texts in the scriptures, the Old Testament, we can say with absolute certainty, this is in reference to Jesus Christ. So, hopefully it was helpful to you. There certainly was a lot in there, more that I could have went over, but I think that's a good bit to chew on. God bless you all. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Looking forward to seeing you again real soon. Take care.